Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, and good morning, Lancaster County. Did I say it right? Great. Take away my factories, someone once said, and I'll build a new and better factory. But take away my people, and grass will grow on the factory floor. Now, those are the words of Andrew Carnegie, the immigrant industrialist, a capitalist with a capital C, a man who came to this state and built an empire that in today's dollars would stir envy in the heart of Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. And yet here he was talking about the value of people to his steel business, just like the value of people to your business, whatever that is: law, accounting, healthcare, hospitality, manufacturing, construction, agriculture, pharmaceuticals, and all of the other industries that I have just offended by not mentioning specifically. Now, Andrew Carnegie could not have foreseen the world as we know it, especially with what's happened over the last couple of years. And yet his words ring true, as companies all over this county, this state, the nation, and the world say that they have plenty of demand for their products and services, but an insufficient supply of labor to support that demand. The grass grows on the factory floor. And so today I want to talk about the realities of the new world of work and the opportunities that exist for you to put yourself in a superior competitive position to compete for the limited supply of labor that we have. Sometimes if I'm speaking for a group, a smaller group, maybe we have a little bit more time, I will sometimes poll the audience using a polling app that we like to use, and ask some questions, and the results will show up on the screen. Last week I was speaking for a group, and I asked everyone in the group to answer this question: what one word would you use to describe the past 2.5 years? Now, before I show you what they said, I just want you to think about how would you answer that question? What one word would you use to describe the last 2.5 years? And see if it looks anything like what they said. I bet it does, right? A couple of months into the pandemic, because I sometimes do some consulting around what are good questions to ask in job interviews, I saw a sign and I took particular notice of this sign. And you know how we did. About the middle of 2020, we were tired of this thing, and we figured it was all going to be over pretty soon, right? We just knew that as soon as that ball dropped in Times Square, that everything was going to be gone as soon as 2021 came in, right? And yet, as we know, it just didn't happen that way. And so I started hearing people talk about something called the post-pandemic workplace. I don't even know if that's a thing. I don't even know if that's really a valid description of it. And so I want to talk about what I prefer to refer to as workplace next. Now, before we get too far, I want to direct you to a page that you can go to on my website for some additional resources. You can download this slide presentation, and there is also a kind of a summary, bullet point summary of everything that we'll talk about, and a few other things. So it's going to be at contentedcows.com/Lancaster, and there is a QR code. So grab it real quick. Don't read it now, but you can always go to contentedcows.com/Lancaster, and there you'll find some additional resources. Great. I want to talk about at least 7 trends that we're seeing in today's workforce, in workplace next. Now, some of these things that I'm going to tell you, you're not going to like, and that's okay. Doesn't matter. They're going to happen anyway, whether you like them or not, without your consent or not. I mean, remember, like when you were a kid and your parents would put some food on your plate that you didn't want to eat, and what did you say? But I don't like that. And what did they say? You don't have to like it. You just have to eat it. Well, some of the things we're talking about, you don't have to like it. But I think if you will employ some of the strategies and the tactics that I'm going to share with you today, I think you'll find yourself coming out ahead against your competitors for talent. So let's go with that. Just a few things real quick. So number one, we know that workers are in the driver's seat for now. We need to respond in that way. Secondly, flexibility is here to stay. That's not going away. We're seeing shorter, simpler hiring processes. We're going to have to stick with that if we're going to try to beat the competition for talent. Fourth, for decades we've been talking about work-life balance, but there's a real emphasis now on truly integrating our work life and our personal life. There needs to be a greater focus on career development. That's how to truly get people engaged to stay with your organization for the long term. And speaking of that, we're going to have to just get used to and accept the fact that tenures are shorter today than they have been in the past. People are not going to come and stay working for your organization for their entire career, and that's fine. I mean, we'd like him to stay a little longer than the average UK prime minister, but I mean, if you get 5 or 6 years of service from someone, we can call that a win. And the seventh and last thing that I want to share with you on this is that we're going to have to get used to working with a lot of people who are just not like we are. And not just in terms of age and other demographics, but in their whole approach to work and the whole way they see the relationship with work. And that's fine. But that's what we're going to have to get in touch with. And a lot of people are going to kind of complain about some of the things that they hear and they see. And I think organizations faced with these changes, these rapid changes, and we've always had change in the workplace, but it's really been accelerated in the last 2 or 3 years. And people who are confronted with that really have two options. The first is they can complain and resist. The other option is that they can adapt their organizations and themselves to burn the available fuel. The workforce that we have is the workforce that we have. We're not getting another one. And so if you can learn to adapt and to get the very most out of the workforce that is available to you and to everyone else, you're going to be able to flourish. If we look at the problem, first of all, I guess I have to say that Workplace Next does not mean lowering standards. It doesn't mean anything goes, and it certainly doesn't mean that you lose control of your business. But the problem is really pretty simple to understand, even if it's not easy to fix. And that is that our labor supply right now is simply considerably lower than our labor demand. I mean, right now we have about 10 million unfilled jobs in the United States and only about 6 million unemployed workers who would be even available to fill those jobs. And you see that gap in the middle there? We call that the problem. And it's as simple as that. It just doesn't get any more complex than that. And the competition is fierce. Right now, the average job applicant is applying to 16 different places in every job search. So every time you're looking at someone, you can just imagine that you've got 15 other companies that you have to look better than if they're going to come to work for you. Unemployment in the United States right now is 3.5%. That is almost as low as it can get. And you see where it is compared to right before the pandemic? It is exactly the same place. Of course, you see that COVID spike, and then it's kind of come down. But this is where we are. That's really cutting into the quick of the labor force, especially when economists tell us that full employment is about 4.5%. We're well below that. If we look at the state of Pennsylvania, you see it's almost exactly the same shape. Now, the numbers are a little bit higher, but you're still below that full employment level. And if we look at Lancaster County, exactly the same shape. And yet you're closer to the national average. Now, you see those hills and valleys and ridges that you see in that particular curve that you didn't see in the others? That tells me you have a seasonal economy, and that's exactly where you are. So the question that I often get is, Richard, where did everyone go? Right? Have you wondered that? Well, again, on the resource page that you can link to, I have 10 answers to that question. We don't have time for 10 answers this morning, but I will tell you 3. And one of the things that we absolutely know is we've talked about this as the Great Resignation, but in reality, it's more like the Great Reassessment. As people are just rethinking and reassessing their whole relationship to work and the whole idea of work, and are they going to work for somebody else or work for themselves? Are they going to work as hard as they have? People are just asking the question, is it worth it? Another really big part of this is retirement. So the retirement rate in the United States stayed almost exactly the same for about 12 years, very flat, and suddenly in 2021 it tripled. So that's a huge drain on the workforce because people of retirement age were in a little bit better position to retire in 2021 and 2022 than they had been 10, 12 years before. And another big part of it is the child care crisis. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So if you're an employer and you're faced with a labor shortage, you really have three choices of what you can do. Number one, you can hope that it's temporary and will resolve itself without treatment. Number two, you can engage in a salary arms race. I mean, you can buy your way out of this, right? You know that. Until you run out of money, which you will. But let me give you a little hope here, because there is a way to avoid having to keep bidding the prices up and up and up. And this is a conceptual thing, but go with me for just a moment. If you think about the job, think about the deal in the job, you have tangibles, compensation and benefits, and you have the intangibles, everything else, leadership, the culture, the environment, the work itself, the people you work with. If we're not paying much attention to those intangibles, it puts a huge pressure on the tangibles. People will work in a lousy job if you pay them enough for it, right? But if we reverse that and we really pay attention to those intangibles, it's amazing how the pressure comes down on the tangibles. The real answer to this is to build your best culture. That's really the best way to do this. But nobody wants to hear that today in the midst of a labor crisis. I mean, it's a little bit like an EMT looking into the horrified eyes of a cardiac patient and suggesting a diet higher in omega-3 fatty acids. Okay? Let's get the heart started first, and then we can talk about the avocado toast, right? So I want to give you some very specific things that you can apply right now, but you need to promise me you're going to work on your culture. But in the meantime, here's some things that you can get to work. And the first suggestion I'm going to give to you, that this will cover a whole lot of issues, and that is give your workers better bosses. Yeah. We've known for a long time, people don't leave companies, they don't leave jobs. They leave bad managers. Make sure they don't have any, okay? And so your first assignment here is to make leadership a primary qualification whenever you're hiring anyone into a leadership position or promoting someone to that. Make sure they're not just good at the technical part of the job, but now, I mean, you're putting them in charge of real human beings. Make sure they have great leadership skills. We're going to talk about recruiting, onboarding, and retention. Let's start with recruiting. Now, imagine for a moment that you are in the market for a job at a hotel, at a great place like this hotel, and you have gotten 2 interviews. You go to each one of those interviews, and in each case, the recruiter has given you very specific instructions on exactly where to go for this interview. You show up at the first one, and this is what you see. That's a real sign, by the way. I didn't make it up. I took that picture. You go to the second one, and they tell you to go in through the employee entrance. And you're greeted by this. You receive both offers. Same job, exactly the same salary. Which one are you going to take? Yeah. Of course. Well, people often go around saying, you know, our employees are our most valuable. Oh, very good. You got that right. Everybody in chorus, yeah. Well, that's easy enough to say. But if you're going to say that, people are going to want to see the evidence, right? And so I think it's really important for us to understand that your reputation as an employer is the best recruiting tool you have. Your reputation as an employer. And yet, like I said, it's easy enough to say our employees are our most valuable asset. What are we doing to show them the evidence? A number of years ago, I established a personal goal to visit all 50 states. I was successful with that, and so one of the states I visited was the state of Nebraska, and I have a picture to prove it. Now, first, do we have anybody in here from Nebraska? Anybody in here from Nebraska? We do? Was that a hand I see there? Okay, so I might have to change what I was going to say a little bit. No, I like Nebraska, and I really like the people of Nebraska, but my wife took this picture of me standing on the state line, Nebraska, South Dakota, and you'll notice it says Nebraska, home of Arbor Day. I don't know about you, but I don't buy it. I mean, if you're going to put a sign on your state line that says home of Arbor Day, I'm going to be looking for some trees. Here's my point. Your reputation will get people there, but it's got to be the reality. It's got to be backed up by the reality of yours being a great culture in which to work that's going to keep them. So, reputation recruits, but reality retains. Reputation recruits, but reality retains. Let's talk about building that reputation and also the reality that backs it up. Recruiting is marketing. Let's just put it that way. Recruiting is marketing. And so if you'll get your head around this next concept and proceed with this in mind with everything, I think you'll do a much better job of finding the people you need working for you. And that is, we need to treat all applicants like they were customers. Treat all applicants like they were customers. You need to be marketing your differentiators. What makes you the best place for this person to come and work? You're going to market that through your website, through social media, through job ads, through postings, through word of mouth in your community, when you're out there with friends in the community, when you go to the central market, when you're at games and so forth, and you're talking about your organization is a great place to work. So the question that I want you to be able to answer for yourself is this: what's so great about working for our company? And until you can answer that, because that's what people are going to be asking you, then you might be at a disadvantage until you can. Now, if you're struggling with the answer to that question right now, one thing you can do is to conduct some research internally. Conducting employee surveys is a great way to really understand what's working and what's not in your organization. On the resource page is an article there about things you want to look at when you're considering doing an employee survey. But here's some additional sources, things you may not have thought about. What we call boomerang employees. These are people who used to work for you and they left for hopefully greener pastures. Maybe those pastures weren't so green. Maybe it was before the pandemic. And who knows what's happened in the intervening 2.5 years. Give them a call, get in touch, find out if they'd be interested in coming back and having a conversation about joining your organization again. In a similar vein, runners up from before. These are people that you had one position, but you had 2 or 3 great candidates. You could only fill one. Well, again, who knows what's happened in the last couple of years? Get back in touch with them and say, hey, I'd like to talk with you again about coming to join our organization. A third source can be those who turned you down before. You wanted them to come work for you and they turned you down. Well, again, who knows what's happened in the last 2.5 years? If you look at this as marketing, when you're marketing to someone, if a prospective customer says, oh, what do? Just drop it and never come back to them? No, you follow up and you go back. Same thing here. Follow up with those people who might have turned you down. Another great source are recent retirees from your organization. This is a tremendous source. They know the organization, they know your culture, they know how to do the job, they already like you, probably, and they can come back. They may not need full-time employment, and you may want to go with that arrangement, and they may not need all of your benefits. So this is a great source. And then just some other examples. I just want you to expand your thinking on where can you find people to begin talking about coming to work for you. One example is members of the autism spectrum, people who are on the autism spectrum, members of that community, including people with Asperger's. There's some jobs they can't do, but there are many jobs that they can do, and they do them very well. And it's kind of an untapped, sometimes ignored, forgotten source. And you have resources right here in Lancaster County that can put you in touch with people who might be able to help you. People who are disabled, veterans, even, yes, people with a criminal record. Now you think, okay, now we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel. No. Keep in mind, there are many people with a criminal record that don't necessarily have a criminal mind. And this is just another great place that we can begin to look. We have to keep in mind that there is truly a difference between requirements and preferences. We may be looking for someone who does not exist. So again, I'm not talking about lowering your standards, but I am saying let's make those standards realistic so that you have a better chance of finding people who can come and help you with the labor problem in your organization. When it comes to recruiting, marketing, you have to have and develop an employer brand. And this is Zappos, their employer brand, and you say, yeah, but we're not Zappos. Well, you don't have to be. First State Bank up in northern Texas, they're not Zappos, but they have become a destination employer by trading on their brand as being the #1 community bank to work for in the country. We also need to rethink what workplace even means. Many of you have already experienced the whole virtual and hybrid and all of that. And listen, that's not going away. We now need to rethink what workplace even means. And so suddenly we were thrust into a situation like this, and now we have to just ask the question, do we stay in that direction? Do we come back? What do we do? Because when it comes to working remotely, the rabbit is out of the hat. People have been to the other side of the river. They have seen the promised land, and many of them are not coming back, and you can't make them. All I'm saying is, as we consider bringing people back into a more traditional workspace, we have to ask the question, can we find people who are willing to do that? And I say we are never going to get all of that toothpaste back in the tube, all right? Because that now, the ability to work remotely now becomes a competitive distinction in the war for talent. Now, many of you are in businesses and industries that's not even an option. If you're in agriculture, if you're in construction, if you're in manufacturing, and many others, that's not an option. And you say, okay, so that doesn't affect me. But it does, because even if you can't offer remote work, you are living in a world where that is now a mainstream option, and it just creates more competitive pressure in terms of your labor force. I've worked from my home for more than 20 years. I got to tell you, it's not about working from the house. It's about the flexibility. And so let's think about it not so much in terms of working remotely or working from home, but more an additional flexibility in the job. And there are other ways to provide flexibility without necessarily remote work. Schedule autonomy, fluid hours, and one of the big ones that we're probably going to have to consider more of, and that is more PTO, more vacation time. Hierology did a study that concluded in May of this year where they asked 6,000 people who had turned down a legitimate good job offer. Why did you turn down the offer? The #1 reason for turning it down in this study was lack of flexible options, and that even beat pay. So the question we have to ask as employers and as leaders is, are we looking for attendance or output? Are we looking for endurance or results? And in some cases, yes, you are looking for attendance. People have to be there on site at certain times to serve your customers. But if that's not the case, we need to be more realistic about what we're expecting. And if you're one of those who says, well, now how am I going to know if they're working if I can't keep my eyes on them every minute of the day? Well, that train has left the station. That one's gone. That one's done. Micromanagement never worked before the pandemic. It certainly isn't going to work now. So I want you to think about the one asset that you already own that you probably are underutilizing, and that is your website. Think about that. Does your website really market you as a great place to work? If not, there are a lot of opportunities. This is about the best I see sometimes, and I look at a lot of organizational career parts of their websites. A list of available positions. Well, isn't that special? No, it's not. What you need to do, 4 things. Your website, first of all, has got to have a prominent careers tab. Go back today and look at your website. Is it even easy to find out how to get a job in your organization? Or do I have to go digging through? Because nobody's going to click more than about twice, okay? So a prominent careers tab. Does it communicate your employer brand? As this one does. This example is SeatGeek, where they say, help the world experience more live. Does your website sell your culture? Think about the last time you bought a home. If it was in the last 5 years or so, you didn't necessarily go and look at that house first. You looked at everything online, and that's what job applicants are doing. They're looking at you online. And finally, you need to give a look inside. One great way to let people get a little bit of a taste of what it's like to work in your organization is through video. I'm going to show you an example of a good one and a bad one. I'll show you the bad one first. Don't do this.
This is another generic recruitment video. Let us begin. Do you see these doors? These are office doors. They lead to a corridor, which leads to an office full of people walking and talking to each other. This probably means they are busy. Deep in thought, he gazes beyond the horizon. If he chewed on a pencil, the shot would be more dramatic.
Okay, that's all I wanted to show you on that one. But here's an example of Piedmont Hospital in the Atlanta, Georgia area. And we're not going to look at the video here, but they have a number of individual vignettes for individual employees who talk about what a great place it is to work. You can do that. You could easily do that. Get a few of your folks, create some videos. They don't have to be Hollywood productions, but create some videos where people can see what it's like. I'm going to show you another example, one that was not a Hollywood production. This is a company, it's Cape Associates Builders up in the Boston area. Let's take a real quick look. This is real. They did not use actors. You'll know this right away. Let's just watch this for a moment.
We're excited today to share with you a few stories of Cape Associates employees and their varied career paths that they've found here. This is a special place to work, and everybody's story and path here is a little bit different.
I was started out as a project manager.
When I started in '86, I came on as a journeyman carpenter.
Is that something you could do? Sure it is, yeah. And it's going to put you ahead of those who haven't done that. Now, if you're going to do videos, let me also say, put those videos, you want to host them on your site, of course, but you also want to host them on YouTube. Why? Because people can search and find you that way. 53% of applicants do the entire application process now on their mobile phone. Okay? You probably didn't, but 53% do. And if we take that only to knowledge workers, to white-collar workers, 72% are doing it, the whole thing, from application to everything, on their mobile phone. So it needs to look good, it needs to work well. If they encounter any difficulties while they're doing this, they're going to move on to someone else who might do it better. Social media. Now, you might say, oh, but I don't use social media. Totally irrelevant. The people who you're looking for, they're hanging out on social media. And so you need to have a presence on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, of course. Hire someone who knows what they're doing to give you a good representation on that. Now, if you have a good Glassdoor or Indeed rating, and we can talk about Glassdoor all day, but we won't, the fact is nobody is going to come look to work for you unless they have first checked you out at least on Glassdoor. And if you have a 4-star or more rating, put that on your website. And you know it can be all over the board. Here's one example of a Glassdoor review. Best job I've ever had, but it's not always this good. Sometimes you'll get something like this. Unless it's a choice between working here and starving to death, keep looking. If you get a good one, make sure that it's there. Here's some real simple stuff. You send out dozens of emails a day. Put a little line down there at the bottom that says, we're hiring, we're looking for people. Click here, take them to that part of your website. Real quick, easy thing to do. What about signs in your location, on your vehicles that say you're hiring, but also, hey, don't forget that little QR code, right? Because nobody's going to be driving down the road and write down your number, but they might scan that QR code. Paying for employee referrals. And hey, you got to give them more than a $25 Starbucks card now. And think about it. If it costs you $10,000 to recruit an employee and someone gives you a great name and you hire them and they turn out, if you pay them $2,500 for that, you're still coming out way ahead. And I love this idea. I just heard from a client this about 6 months ago. Get referrals from new hires in their first week when they're really excited. That's a great time to do it. But here's the thing, don't ever stop recruiting. And you've done that, some of you, right? So don't just wait until you have an opening to start recruiting. I like to fish. I'm not very good at it, but I like it. But I have noticed I've never had a fish jump voluntarily into the boat. I gotta keep a line in the water, and so do you. Once you've recruited, we got to get them onboarded. And onboarding sometimes is like the most boring thing in the world. It's about getting to work on your first day and filling out all kind of paperwork. No. Onboarding should welcome the person, educate them about your organization, celebrate them, and give them the opportunity for their leaders to check in with them. So really quickly, On the resource page, here's an article with about 6 or 8 different ideas. I'm going to share 2 or 3 with you here on what I call re-recruiting, which is my term for onboarding. How about this? A welcome letter from the CEO or owner of the company. In the first few days before they come, between their time that they're hired and the time that they start, a welcome letter from the CEO. You could do that. And when you do, because that applicant, that new employee has never had anything like that before, they're going to be blown away and they're going to say, man, I have really picked the best place to come to work. Similarly, a welcome call from someone in those first few days before they come, somebody maybe whom they did not meet during the interview process. Or an onboarding buddy, somebody who can help them with those kind of new employee things for the first few weeks, including taking them to lunch at least on the first day of the new job. What a great way to get people involved and welcome, and even hold a party, a celebration for that new person on the first day. This doesn't have to be a 5-hour-long drunken brawl, but maybe a 15-minute just a celebration with some refreshments to say, hey, we have a new team member here. Let's all get together, stop what we're doing for a minute, and welcome this person. Let them know how glad we are to be there. When they get home that day and they talk to their spouse, and their spouse says, so how was your first day? Oh, we had a party. Oh, what was the party for? It was for me. What is that going to do for that person? Absolutely. And at the end of the first day, the first week, the second week, and so forth, needs to be a good, clear check-in with that employee. How was it? Were there any things that surprised you? Was there someone here who was particularly helpful to you? Because if so, I want to thank them. What can I do to help you be more successful on your second day? All right, so you've recruited them, you've onboarded them, now we got to retain them. One of the best ways to do that is to make sure everybody completely understands the impact their work has. Because the minute anybody begins to question whether or not what they do is very important, they can't possibly be engaged and not going to stay with you. A number of years ago, I was doing some consulting at a company that made hospital products, these bag and tube assemblies. They were a mess, believe me. And I went in there the first day and I started interviewing employees and saying, what do you do? Tell me about your job. And they all described it in terms of assembling pieces of plastic. That's not what they do. So I put them on a school bus. I took them to the closest hospital 10 miles down the road where they saw the things they had been making in the arms of people, saving lives and reducing unbearable pain. And they all came back and they said, now we know what we do. Do your people know what they really do? Help them get in touch with that. We've been talking about work-life balance, and I'm going to suggest we stop calling it work-life balance and instead just understand that it's just life with work fully integrated. We need to pay more attention to employee development. In fact, let me give you this little kind of rubric here. For recruiting, a number of individual sources tell us that for recruiting, you want to optimize compensation and then flexibility. So flexibility is important. Really optimize and talk about compensation. But when it comes to retaining people you already have, you want to optimize flexibility and then development. Probably need to customize our benefits. Maybe not everybody wants exactly just what you want to lay out there. What can we do? One size fits one. Child care options. My goodness, this is the huge issue. And whoever figures this one out will really save the day. But at the very least, and I know you can't open a nursery in your facility, most of you, but if you think about how much it costs when you lose someone, if you could subsidize their child care situation, you're probably still going to come out ahead. Weekly pay, that's a simple one. Some people really, if somebody's looking at one job and they're looking at another, these people pay every week, these people pay every 2 weeks, they're probably going to take this one. Put yourself in an advantage position with that. Probably need to review our vacation and parental leave policies as well. I'm not sure we have so much of a labor shortage as we have an appreciation shortage. And so we need to really learn to say thank you and to say thank you more often. And as Napoleon Bonaparte said, a man will fight long and hard for a bit of colored ribbon. Doesn't have to be expensive. It has to be thoughtful. So a few quick ideas here. How many of you have ever written a handwritten thank you note to an employee for something that they did at work and mailed it to their home? Let me just see the hands. Yeah. You know that's a huge winner, right? Because it happens so rarely. You know, it's the only thing you're going to get in the mail that day that is not a credit card offer. Oops, sorry. Or an offer to buy their home or a political ad or something like that. So they're going to love that. Send that thank you note to their home. And when you're thanking people, thank their families. Someone who maybe has spent a lot of time at the office and put in extra work, really gone the extra mile. Say to their family one night, hey, listen, on Thursday night, we're going to have dinner delivered to your home. I mean, tell them about it first. Don't surprise them with it. Tell them about it first. What a great way just to say thank you. And here's my last one. I love this idea. I wish I could say I made any of these up. I didn't. They were all given to me by clients and audiences I've spoken for. A manager's car wash. Now, this does not mean managers come in and get their cars washed. And here in Lancaster, you probably want to do this in the spring, not right now, or not coming up into the winter. But this is where everybody comes in, and the managers come in on a Friday in T-shirts and cutoffs and wash the employees' cars. Just a way to say thank you. But I tell you, as we close, I just want to leave you with one idea, tell you one story, one idea that I think if you'll pull all of this together will help you to be an attractive place to work where people will want to come and want to stay and want to be productive for you. The year was 1940, and Jim Prentice was a sergeant major in the Gordon Highlanders, a Scottish regiment of the British Army in World War II. With his platoon of 36 men on the island of Orkney in the extreme northern reaches of Scotland in the winter of 1940 on maneuvers in preparation for the battles soon to come in Burma. Suddenly a snowstorm descended upon the island and they were too far from their base camp to get back safely. The sergeant major saw a farm, not unlike a farm he might see here in Lancaster County. And he went up to the farmhouse door, he knocked on the door, and the farmer came down and the sergeant major said, "Can my men spend the night in your barn?" And the farmer said, "Yes, but only under one condition, and that is that everyone will come in and have a hot meal in our kitchen." Humble kitchen, small, rough-hewn wooden table could only accommodate 6 at a time. And 6 at a time, that sergeant major ushered those men in where they enjoyed an inelegant feast of carrots, ground beef, turnips, and pancakes. Only when all 36 had been fed did the sergeant major sit down to see if there was anything left. And there was. There was a young boy in the corner of the room, about 9 years old. He was the farmer's son, and he observed this with some curiosity. And he walked up to the sergeant major and he said, "Why'd you go last? I thought you were the boss man." And the sergeant major looked at him and he said, "Lad, first ye feed the troops. They're nae use hungry. First you feed the troops. They're no use hungry." 40 years later, Jim Prentice found himself once again on the island of Orkney, and this time not as a soldier, but this time as a tourist, and this time accompanied by his wife and his daughter, who is now my wife. And as Jim went for what he would have called a wee donger, a short walk, he was looking for a pub, if you want to know. He came across the farm. He didn't know if he would recognize it, but he did. And about the time that came to his realization, a man in his late 40s came walking across the farm, and the two of them engaged, and Jim said, "Oh, you won't believe it. It was back during the war. I was here, and it started to snow, and I walked up to that door right there, and the man came down, and the guy interrupted him, and he said, 'First you feed the troops.'" And Jim said, "Oh, you're not the wee boy." He said, "Aye." He said, "I've never forgotten that night, primarily because we didn't have anything for breakfast the next morning. But I've always remembered what you told me, what that sergeant major told me. First, you feed the troops." He said, "I took over the management of this farm about 20 years ago, and sometimes there hasn't been a lot to feed our troops, our farm hands. But I've always remembered that. First, you feed the troops. And you know what? You look around, we're doing pretty well." Folks, in Lancaster County, everybody is hungry for something. What are your people hungry for? Thank you. Thank you.